Welcome to Brave Dynamics. This is your host, Jeremy Au. Leadership is harder than it looks. As a proven founder and Harvard MBA, I interview courageous entrepreneurs, executives, and investors every week. I also share my frontline experiences, coaching insights, and own professional development journey. If you're stepping up as a new leader, founding a startup, or venturing into the great unknown, this is the podcast for you. I'm happy to introduce Kwok Jia Chuan. He currently leads payment product policies globally for Google. Previously, he was deputy director in the Singapore government's Digital Transformation Office. He led a product team working on digital payment and identity products. He also led a project for PayNow, one of the world's first government-created peer-to-peer payment systems. He led its national adoption from 0% to over 75% in 2 years. PayNow now transacts over $12 billion annually. Today, Singaporeans now commonly say, I'll pay now you, just like how Americans say, I'll Venmo you, or I'll PayPal you. He also happens to be a graduate of the London School of Economics and MIT, and is recognized as a World Economic Forum Global Shaper. Welcome, Jia Chuan, and good to see you again.
Great to see you, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
I first got to know you because we were friends all the way back in secondary school, and we were in the creative arts program as two poets.
Yeah, definitely a big change. What, it's been 15 years now? Wait, more than that, 17 years.
Yeah, you know you're getting old when you can't remember the number of years you've been friends for. That's how you know you're old.
Yeah, beyond the number of years, it's also about many memories, right? And I think we've got a lot of different things that we've worked on together. So really happy to be here.
Our friendship clicked back in the army together when we were army buddies in our commander course together. And I always remember walking into the auditorium and seeing you, and I was just so delighted to see a familiar face. And I had no idea that we would do some crazy stuff like, digging a trench together and buddy up and tackle a ton of jungle navigation courses. I had no idea that would be like the cornerstone of our working relationship ever since then.
Yeah, I mean, I could always count on you to lead me through, the past where we were lost, and yeah, we could always count on having each other's back as well. So, yeah, and I'm really glad that I've continued to keep such a friendship to this time.
Yeah. Many of you may already know that Jia Chuan and I co-founded Conjunct Consulting, which is a platform deploying consulting services for Singapore social sector. We started out in those early days with just an idea on literally a piece of paper, and at that time Skype, I think, in doing our calls. It's crazy to see how much we've grown in deploying millions of dollars of services. So it's been amazing to see the growth in terms of not just providing incredible support for our frontline social services. We've also helped train thousands of leaders that will be the next generation of social change leadership in Singapore and Southeast Asia.
Yeah, we started out in a small room, just broadcasting a call for volunteers, and I recall at that time we were saying, oh, would this even work? I think we both had our doubts during that time, although I think we trusted it. I think we built a good team around us, we got it up, and I think what we've really built is something that I think has managed to stand on its own for the past 8 years. It couldn't have happened without you. Let's put it this way.
It couldn't have happened without you either.
Yeah.
We should talk a little bit about those early days, right? I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of people often ask, what's it like to found a startup or a platform? And what's it like to do that in Singapore or Southeast
Yeah.
Asia?
Nowadays you hear companies like Grab, like Gojek, you hear companies like Lazada, you hear companies like Redmart. Back at the time, the entrepreneurship scene really wasn't that mature. There was a lack of like VC funding, there was a lack of like VC capital as well. So it really took, I think, some guts at that time to try and start something. What was going through your head when you first started Conjunct?
I really wanted there to be a solution for the social sector where so many large nonprofits and charities and social enterprises and even government agencies want to support in thinking through these tough questions around their operations. I wanted to support them, and consult for them, but just didn't have a platform to do that effectively or efficiently, right? And I think that's where you and I were discussing the problem, and we very much agreed the problem existed, and we couldn't figure out a way to plug ourselves in. And so we decided to create a platform to plug ourselves in, and ended up creating a platform plugging in thousands of people more. You are entirely fair to say that we did that based on a problem, yet we didn't have many role models at that time for what it meant to build something from scratch. I still remember that in those early days, there wasn't any co-working spaces. There wasn't any infrastructure really for entrepreneurs. We kind of built out that language for ourselves locally. It's just interesting to see how things have changed rapidly over since our founding.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think the important part, as you rightly point out, is actually about the community, right? It's about identifying that problem, but also making sure we get together people that are passionate enough to solve that problem. And if you think about it, that's really the foundation of some of the biggest companies that are out there as well. And I think for Conjunct, what we really wanted to do was to get people with different skill sets, bring them together, and create something that was greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that initial growth of entrepreneurs and community. I still remember that in our second year, we started being the pioneer, one of the first 10 members of what was then called Impact Hub Singapore, and now it's called Found 8. And I still remember that early group of people who were experimenting with working out of a co-working space. And almost all of us had been working out of Starbucks or with friends, at those early stages. And it's interesting to see how many of our peers in that space have gone on to grow out their businesses since then and really become role models for other people in the community. So, Song from Grain, I think it's honestly incredible that, the community has really grown for people to be able to help each other found businesses and grow different platforms and make a difference. We grew Conjunct Consulting and bootstrapped that to a sustainable piece. And, I went off to the US where, I was doing my Harvard MBA and founding another high growth business. And you in Singapore seeing the ecosystem continue to change and grow. And, that's also where you started working at the government digital transformation office as well. So I'd love to hear your experience.
Mhm. I've been fortunate enough to be in, I guess, like different places and different positions, whether it's with Conjunct or with the government or now in my current role at Google. A few things continue to guide me through how I work with people, how I really try to make sure that, we produce high growth teams and effective teams as well. So I would look at that as kind of three broad values or three broad pillars that have stood by me. So the first is that, it's never about yourself and it's always about the people around you and how you can create impact around them. Whether it's with Conjunct, whether it's with the government or it's with Google, there was always an element for me was that how can I actually magnify impact by bringing great people together and giving them that culture and that environment to succeed. It's not about you taking all the glory, or you were the president back then and I was the chairman, but we both knew that it was never just about us. It was about the many volunteers who Conjunct who would come together, work late nights to provide the best recommendations they could for the organizations. Similarly, in the government, it was never just about me, but it was about the teams that I work with who really, really pushed themselves, throughout weekends, throughout nights, and made sure that the products that we put out were the best that we could do for the people of Singapore. Similarly, in Google now, I'm seeing some really passionate people come together, and the priority is always the same, respecting the opportunity and respecting the users, making sure that, these people come together with their different skill sets, bring the best opportunity that they can get. So that's the first thing. The second thing is really about creating what I call a culture of psychological safety. You can have really talented people in the room, but if they are, for lack of a better word, jerks, they would scare off other people out there. And that leads to an atmosphere of fear. That leads to an atmosphere where people don't want to contribute. That leads to an atmosphere of suspicion. And overall, that just brings down, I think, the performance of a team as well. I've seen teams, where I have to step in and say, look, this is not the attitude we should be coming in from. At Google, there's a famous phrase, right? Don't be evil. Many people think that don't be evil applies, outside to the products as well. But honestly, that applies to, the people that work in Google every day as well. how they work with each other, how they try to bounce, discuss ideas. And I think that's something that's really key to what we've been able, the effect that the company's been able to do. So the third thing really is to think big. And I think to really push yourself to think about what are the ideas, what are the new things that can change, not be constrained by like limits. I recall when you and I were just two people doing Conjunct, we never imagined it would grow into something that would create millions of dollars of impact. Similarly, in the government, when we thought about pay now, we were thinking about how to do real-time transactions, things that people could click on a tap of a button just by entering someone's phone number and sending money. That was an arcane concept 4 or 5 years back, but we managed to pull it off, and now I think it has a really good user experience for anyone who uses that. Similarly in Google, the different products, search, geo, YouTube come together to create something that's big. And I think that's something that I would really encourage everybody to think about: how to think big, how to stamp your mark on that, and continue to push these ideas.
Let's zoom in a little bit about the government experience before switching to the Google side.
Yep.
So, many people often talk about how amazing the Singapore Digital Transformation Office is
Yep.
versus the government's efforts in different countries, right? What would you say are your observations that make your team productive and as innovative as it is?
They move very fast as compared to other governments around the world. So it's like, I think that they iterate very fast. They're able to put together things and combine that, I think, with the ability to think about, what are some of the major challenges, for the next like 10, 20, 30 years. That I think is something it's a really strong combination that really lets Singapore pushes the envelope in terms of like digital transformation. So, I mean, going back to the payments part of it, right? Most payment system nowadays are still, via slower, gross settlement issues, gross settlement systems. Thinking about a real-time payment system and cross-border real-time payments as well. These are things that we had to continue to push, and these were ideas. But the fact that we could bring these ideas to execution, I think, speaks to the amazing ability of many very very different divisions within the government. Whether it's the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the central bank with their expertise in finance, or the government technology agency with their expertise in technology, coming together, I think, to create systems, create devices, create platforms that ultimately result in a lot of impact to people.
Yeah. What's interesting is that you are one of the few people to really push for changing societal norms in so many different domains, from a public policy and government perspective, another from Google, large tech, to, kind of like a more entrepreneurial outfit. And, many people often ask, how do I find out what is the best role for them to make that change they want to see in the world? From your perspective, how do you often talk about it? Is it like a false dichotomy between those choices? Or would you say like there are ways that you would frame that conversation for people who are trying to figure out their path?
Well, I think the way to figure out the path is to try it, and in a way, try small steps. Be ready to course correct. Eventually, that will lead you down to the path where you feel comfortable about. I think the ability to take small steps is one, that allows people to actually try and see whether something, works for them. If you don't have passion, you don't have enthusiasm, then nothing else matters, because that ultimately, determines whether you're able to bring your best to your work. So I was very passionate about the government part, and wanting to make sure that we could impact, the people of Singapore, wanting to build, the best products for them as well. And in a way, I think going to Google was another step in that direction, because I wanted to figure out how best we could make great products and apply those lessons.
One thing that I so agree with you is about small steps. The way I often frame it up is for almost every product, you try before you buy. And I think that applies so much for careers and jobs as well, that it's often very hard to, see past the product or job description. It's such a different experience to actually be living and using that product, let alone actually doing the functions of that job. What would you say have been some interesting differences that you've seen between your role in the government versus your time at Google?
Well, I think I'll start off with the commonalities first before going to difference. I think both in the government and Google, people are very passionate about solving problems and finding out the best ways to solve the problems as well. That being said, ultimately the government is very focused, on Singapore, and they have every right to be because they are the elected government. Google, by definition of it being a larger company, is looking at the world and looking at how you can build products for the world as well. So I think that outlook is different. That's one of the big differences that I've been trying to adjust to. Neither of them are right or wrong. It's not a black or white dichotomy. I think both organizations have different purposes, and ultimately that's down to the nature of the organizations.
That is so true. What's been interesting is that you've also done a lot of focus around payments. And I'd love to hear about how you've built out not just the experience, but also decided to continue focusing on payments and that dimension of society.
Payments ultimately is an everyday activity. When you go out, when you buy, when you go shopping, when you go eating, payments is something that everybody needs to do. And I think there's tremendous opportunity, to make payments safe, simple, and secure for people. And I think with technology advancing, with an understanding of what flows you need for payments, that really is the opportunity to make things simple, to avoid, say for example, filling out paper forms. 100 years ago we filled in checks. Now we're still filling in checks. Surely there must be a way for things to be done faster, perhaps even like digitally, and make it a better user experience for everyone. That being said, precisely because payments is a universal activity, you also want your new solutions to not be exclusive, and not just for those who can afford it. For everybody out there. What's really fun for me and what's really challenging for me is to make sure that we build systems, we build things that everybody can use.
Awesome. So, wrapping things up, what advice would you give to yourself 10 years ago?
It would really be executing at speed, being ruthless in consistency. So ultimately, it's about improving yourself every single day, being a little bit better than you were yesterday. Learning something new. There will be days where you fail. There will be days where you trip up. There will be days where you feel sad. But ultimately, it's about that consistency, bringing your best every day to the job.
Awesome. Thank you, Jia Chuan.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's been wonderful talking to you.